Well, good morning, everybody. It's good to see you again. Who was it you said we're all buddies here? Yeah, because we are. We are. Today's sermon is entitled Defeating Discouragement. Now, who here knows what Murphy's Law is? Who has heard of Murphy's Law? Mac. Can you tell us what it is? Basically, there's different versions, but yeah, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. And I was kind of curious about who Mr. Murphy was. Was that like a made-up person like Betty Crocker or, some of these other people you hear about? And according to Wikipedia, that well-respected source on the internet, there indeed was a Mr. Murphy. And he was actually a member of the Army and the Air Force. He was a pilot. But after he got away from that, he was a researcher, and he worked in the late 1949s on various projects with the military, and one of them was the rocket sled. Now, I don't know what a rocket sled actually is, but it sounds like something a man would invent. Like, is that a sled with rockets on it? Or, is it a rocket with sleds on it? I don't know, but supposedly things with his experimentation went wrong just when he thought they were going good, and he was the first one that kind of immortalized the phrase that if anything can go wrong, it will, even though he wasn't the first person to come up with that concept. In various writings, you can find even back to the 1800s where other inventors, seamen, so forth, would echo that same sentiment that if anything can go wrong, it will. And there's some other similar phrases that are blamed on poor Mr. Murphy, such as left to themselves, things tend to go from bad to worse. And you will never find a lost article until you buy another one. Or everything goes wrong all at once. Now, Jerry and I can contest to that. I am convinced that appliance manufacturers somehow, when they make appliances, there's some sort of signaling system. So when one appliance dies, they all go. And not only is it appliances, but they include the car. Now, recently, we have had trouble with our heat pump, our refrigerator, the washer, and my car has broken down 3 different times for 3 different reasons. Just when you think you get the thing fixed, then the fuel pump dies. Now, there's another version. If everything seems to be going well, you've obviously overlooked something. Now, I shared with you all what happened on our almost trip to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico over Christmas. Well, we also have another congregation of people that you don't see, and I talk about them from time to time, and I call those our Facebook church. We are up to 74 members on our Facebook church, and they watch these sermons that we post. So I thought I would repeat that story because I have repeated it to pretty much everybody that I know, and they're probably tired of me hearing about it, but I'd like to repeat what happened to Jerry and I over Christmas for those who weren't here to hear me talk about it earlier. But what happened was Jerry and I have been watching way too many reruns of The Love Boat. Do you remember the old Love Boat series? Yeah. And they always left from Los Angeles, and they were always going, Julie, the cruise director, we're going to beautiful Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. So Jerry and I get this big idea that over Christmas, since, our kids are grown and gone, let's go to the beach for Christmas. Now, many of you know our daughter is a flight attendant for a major airlines. Whoa. And one of the perks is Mommy and Daddy get free airfare. Yes. But the trick is it's only if there's an empty seat. Only if there's an empty seat. You can't make reservations. You can look on the internet and she can tell me how many people have tickets and how many people are like us that hope to get a free seat. So things were looking good for Christmas. They were looking good. And that, coupled with there's actually 3 flights out of Lexington that connect to Dallas that go to Puerto Vallarta. So we just knew we were going to get to go. And things were going so good. I found a great hotel at a great price. And a lot of hotels during Christmas, they jack the price up like double, triple, whatever, because they know people are going on vacation and they'll pay more. I found a wonderful hotel on the beach, kind of lucked into it, for $100 less than a reservation I already had. So I called up Hotels.com and said, well, what about this other place? And they said, yeah, we'll cancel that one. You can have this one. Hot dog. It was ocean view and all-inclusive. It just kept getting better and better. So we go out to the airport early in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. Didn't make it out of Lexington. The flight to Dallas was full. They said not to worry, there's 2 more today. So we go home, because we were leaving out of Lexington. We go home, come back at noon. Come back, the flight had 1 seat left, and there's 2 of us. They said, but don't worry, there's a 3rd flight out, and it's only half full, so you stand a really good chance of that. Things are going great. And not only that, the gate attendant says, the flight from Dallas to Puerto Vallarta has a whole bunch of openings in first class. We're going to bump you up to first class because it looks really good that you'll get to go first class. And we're sitting there, man, this is going great. This is awesome. So we waiting for the 3rd flight out. Yep, here's your tickets. Here's your free flight, They even give us the tickets for the next flight. We're sitting there in anticipation of getting to go on this wonderful beach trip. Well, at once we're looking at the monitor and it says flight delayed for half an hour. Flight delayed. Why? There was some bad weather up north, but it's coming from Dallas. Well, come to find out, something fell off its wing. Now, it wasn't like a major part of the wing like the flaps or anything, but it's this little bitty static electricity thingy on the wing that they have to have the thingy or they can't fly. So it took them a half an hour to fix that. So it gets on its way. And it lands in Lexington. Now, this is one of those little kiddie jets, the ones with 44 seats. So they rush everybody off that's on there, and then they rush everybody on, and we're on the plane. We're on the plane. And we expect to, just hit it and go, because the captain comes on and he says, we know we're late, but I think I can make up the time. We'll get you there, no problem, blah, 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 blah. So we're sitting there, and we're sitting there. And we're sitting there, and Jerry goes, what's wrong? What's wrong? There's something wrong. We're just sitting here. So the pilot gets off the plane, comes back on, and he's waving his arms around and shaking his head. And, this cannot be good. This cannot be good. Things look like they're going so good, and then all at once, everything goes wrong. And the captain says, when it rains, it pours. He goes, you will not believe this, but at the minute the last person got on this jet, all the electric went out to the Lexington airport. And not only the electric, the computers, the internet, everything is dead. Then he says, not to worry, we can still leave, but I have to recalculate all the load and the weight distribution on the jet before we can go by hand, and I haven't done it for 25 years. Now, that in itself is a little unsettling. I hope he was a good student. I hope he remembers how to do this, or we were going to be flying like this. Too much stuff on that side. Oops. So, he says, it's going to take me at least a half an hour to figure this out. So, Jerry and I are counting the minutes, and we realized, because the 2 flights were pretty close to each other, that we weren't going to make it. And we asked the flight attendant, is there any way we have a flight leaving at 7? Are we going to make it? She goes, no. So we're sitting there. What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So we just decide to get off we go, can we get off the jet? And she looks at it kind of weird, like, well, yeah, you can leave. So we stumbled home through the dark, thinking about how things were going so well. Things were just falling into place. It's like blessings. It's like, oh my goodness, this is just awesome. And then all at once, we're sitting on our living room couch. We're not on the beach. We're not at the buffet. We're at Richmond, Kentucky, and we're kind of pouting and upset. Well, things like that are not new. And I promise I won't share the story again with the congregation. But I just had to tell it for the sake of the people that might be listening today, that all of us have had experiences in our life when we look like things are just clicking along so well, and then the brakes come on, and the wheels fall off, and then the engine blows. It happens. And it happened in the Old Testament. And it happened in the book of Nehemiah. Now, some of us are familiar with the book of Nehemiah, what's going on with all of this, and often it's read in conjunction with the book of Ezra, because, two books that were written about the same type of events, and some older manuscripts are actually combined together. But what happened was, and you know the story, the Jews were taken into exile into Babylonia. And they were there for an extended period of time. I don't remember how long. But there was a king named Cyrus, not Sirius. That's a satellite network. King Cyrus. Cyrus. Anywho, he decides to allow the Jewish people to go back home to Jerusalem to rebuild the city, which is kind of strange. The pagan king wants to do this. And it's going great. He says, if you want to go, you can go. He said, we here will even chip your here. I want them to contribute to the cause, to have some nice stuff to rebuild the city. And he sweetened the deal even more. He said, we got a bunch of treasures that King Nebuchadnezzar took when he conquered Jerusalem. He took some really good stuff. And I love it. In the book of Ezra, you can actually see the list. Whoever wrote this book must have been a CPA. Because it lists like all the stuff by type and the number of each piece. If you want to go back there and look sometime, the gold bowls, the silver bowls, the this and the that, and then the other stuff. And not only does it show that, it shows the population of all the people that decided to go back to Jerusalem to build the city. By, tribe and name and family and all that. So there was about 50,000 people or so. So they are all pumped up because, they've got the old treasures back. They're going to go back to their beloved Jerusalem and rebuild it. And they are excited. Well, they get there and things kind of go south. Now, who was Nehemiah that this book is written about? Does anybody remember? He's not the king. No, well, he's not actually a priest. I would call him a bartender. They get all uppity in the Bible and they call him the king's cupbearer. But what his job to do, and he was under King Xerxes, his job was to bring the king and queen wine. I'd call him the bartender today. But he hears things are not going well in Jerusalem because when they get there, the place is trashed. It is trashed. And people are upset because here they are to build, and it's just too much. So when he brings the cup of wine to the king that night, he's all down in the face, and the king says, what's wrong? I've never seen you look like this. And you're not sick. And he explains what happened. So the king says, okay, take some time off. Promise you'll come back. He must have been a good bartender, kind of like Isaac on Love Boat. We were talking about Love Boat. He says, promise you come back, take some time off and go see, what's going on down there. So he heads back to Jerusalem, and he has some other people with him, and he's on, I'm not sure what he's riding, if it's a donkey or a horse or, I'm not sure what he's on. But he's the only one on a mount, he says. And as he gets closer to the city, it gets so bad with where it has been trashed, all the stone and junk. He said he can't even get through riding. He had to go around a different way and come back in to inspect the city. And, everything he heard is true. This place is just trashed. The people are discouraged looking at all this mess. And please remember, back then they didn't have Home Depot and Lowe's, and they didn't have bulldozers, and they didn't have cranes, and they didn't have cement trucks. They just didn't. That was later. So here the people are looking at this undaunting task of trying to rebuild the city. And first they're going to start with the wall. Why? Because that is fortification, and here's a picture, a rendering of what things might have looked like. So this Nehemiah, he is some kind of people person. You know, he's kind of like Coach Cal, you know, motivating the people to get the job done. So he says, you know what's wrong with you guys? You are looking at a big task. I mean, you are looking at a huge task, and you're looking at it saying, there is no way we can do this. But Nehemiah had an idea. He said, rather than try to look at the whole thing, I'm going to divide you all up into groups, and I'm going to give you a task. So he assigned this group to rebuild this portion. And if you look in chapter 3, it goes through where he explains who does what. And I won't read all of this, but you can do that later. But verse 1 of chapter 3, Eliashib, the high priest, and his fellow priests went to work and rebuilt the sheep gate. They dedicated it and set its doors in place, building as far as the Tower of the 100, which they dedicated, as far as the Tower of Hananel. The men of Jericho built the adjoining section, and Zaccur, son of Imni, built next to them. So each person had their own section. And it was going really good. He goes, okay, you guys, you build this. You've got from here to here. You've got from here to here. So it talks about the various gates and the sections. Let's see. It's talking about the fountain gate was repaired by Shalom, son of Kohazel, ruler of the district of Mizpah. And he rebuilt it and roofed it and put on the doors. And he got that part going underway. And then there was the valley gate. It was repaired by Hanam and other residents of Zanoah. They rebuilt it, put its doors and bolts and bars in place. And they also repaired 500 yards of the wall as far as the dung gate. The dung gate, D-U-N-G. You know, I could just kind of wonder, what was that like, the restrooms? Yeah, I guess, or is that like, the package treatment plant? I'm not sure, but, anyway, I wonder what lucky person got that one. What lucky group got that. But by taking a task that seemed unsurmountable, Nehemiah broke it down into baby steps. He says, guys, each of you will have a section. Just complete yours, and the next guy will complete his, and things are going great. Until Murphy's Law happens. Oh, no. If anything go wrong, it will. It did. It did. And everything seemed to go wrong at once. All at once, the workers believed they couldn't do everything. Something happened. Something happened that was unexpected. And it kind of reminds me, have you heard the story about the mom of 8? The mother of 8. She decided to go visit her next door neighbor, and she left the kids over at the house next door. And it was summertime, and the windows were open, and the doors were open. So she could hear if there were any skirmishes or yelling or screaming, if the kids got into a fight or whatever. And the mom was visiting with the neighbor, and she started thinking, they're too quiet. Now, who's a parent? Yeah. You know what I'm saying? This isn't just a mommy thing. Daddies pick up on this too. But when the kids are too quiet, there's probably something wrong. So she went back, and the 5 youngest of the 8 were sitting in the corner, intent on something. And she said, So she snuck up behind to see what they were looking at, what they were so intent on. And in the middle of them were several baby skunks. So the mother goes, kids, run! So each of them grabs a skunk and runs to their bedroom. So in that case, something did go wrong. Something did go wrong. Murphy brought skunks. But it's universal. It's universal. the concept of discouragement. We're about to discuss about how the Jews became discouraged and why a lot of times we just expect things to go wrong. You know, being discouraged is not just a one-time thing. If you're discouraged, there's not like this immunization that builds up where you're never discouraged again. You can be discouraged over and over. In fact, you can be discouraged by the fact that you're discouraged a lot. Have you ever met someone that lives under constant discouragement and just expects the worst? That Mr. Murphy's Law rules. And it's contagious. It's contagious. Discouragement spreads even by casual contact. Kind of like a head cold. People can become disheartened because you are. And what are you? You are a party pooper. You are a wet blanket. You're the one that never gets invited because it's always something wrong. And if it looks like it's going good, it won't. Kind of like the skunk story. You can be bummed out because other people are discouraged. And this morning, we're going to focus on the causes and the cures for discouragement as seen through the book of Nehemiah. So let's begin looking at causes for discouragement. There are actually two main types of discouragement. One set of problems comes at us from the outside, and the other set attacks us from the inside. Let's look first at external causes. You know, the wall workers in the book of Nehemiah, in chapter 3, they were just excited. They were. They began their work with grand anticipation. And it says about them in verse 6 of chapter 4, the people worked with all their heart. You know, they overcame through Nehemiah's help that they couldn't do it. Now they were convinced that they could, and things were really going good. The wall was going up. And then something happened. You know, sometimes when you start a project, you know, it doesn't matter what it is. Sometimes when we start a project, we are so excited about what we think this is going to turn out looking like. You know, and that can be anything. But the initial feeling is exhilaration, like, wow. You know, something is coming and something is good, and the Jews were back to build their beloved Jerusalem. Something they had never expected. You know, they were in captivity. You know, they wrote songs, and there's verses about how they longed to come back home. And they really thought they probably never would. They dreamed about it, but here was their chance. Here was their chance to come back home. And they get there, and it's an utter mess. It's an utter mess. Someone has said that exhilaration is a feeling that you get just after a great idea hits you, like rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, and right before you realize what's wrong with it. Where God is at work, please remember the enemy is also at work. Rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem was certainly no exception to this. When people take kingdom priorities seriously, which they did, Satan stirs up agitators to block the work of God and to dishearten his followers. That's how Satan works. Through discouragement. So how did these people that were so excited become so discouraged? Well, first of all, you see in verses 1 and 2 of chapter 4, this guy named Sanballat, I don't know. You know, some names from the Bible are repeated and are around even today. I do not know any Sanballats or Sanballats or whatever his name was. So I don't know how to say it correctly. But when he heard, you know, and there's always naysayers. There is always naysayers. And when he heard they were rebuilding the wall, he became angry and was greatly incensed, and he ridiculed the Jews. Now, that's not the first time we see his mention in this book. of Nehemiah. That's the third time when we read about him in chapter 4. And he's a troublemaker all the way along. He is. He is just there to stir up trouble. And he was Nehemiah's stiffest opposition. Every time we read about him, Sanballat, he's standing against the work of God, rejecting and ridiculing everything that Nehemiah is trying to accomplish. You can't do it. Someone has said that ridicule is the language of the devil. Those who can stand bravely when shot at will collapse when they're laughed at. And not to sound sexist, but I think this is particularly true of men. That most of these builders were men, in fact, maybe all. The enemy often insults the servants of God. And that's a tactic that the devil repeats over and over. When David, as a boy, stepped in front of the big giant Goliath, what happened? He ridiculed him. Do you remember the story of Elisha? Where the kids said, "Go down, bald head, go down, bald head," calling him names. Do you remember that the soldiers mocked Jesus during his trial and the crowd taunted him while he was hanging on the cross? That's Satan's M.O. That's what he does. He ridicules to destroy. Yeah, if you're the Son of God, get yourself down off that cross and do some magic something or other and prove it. Sanballat and his buddies began to ridicule the workers even before the work started in 2:19. They mocked and they ridiculed us. So here in chapter 4, he's making a speech before the army of Samaria, intensifying his power of ridicule. First he starts it with his buddies. Now he's getting the army in on it. Bring more to this party. Trying to find my scripture here. But anyway, I can't find it. But what he said was, the workers are feeble. They're going great guns, but I think they're getting tired. I think they're wearing out. I think they're girly men. Withered and miserable is how it translates. Next, he ridiculed the job they were doing by making taunting questions. I wonder if they're ever really going to build the whole wall. So you can kind of hear this guy, kind of like a stand-up comedian, and he's got the hecklers behind him, giving it to the guys that are working. Well, the army breaks out in laughter. How could a remnant of feeble Jews hope to build a wall strong enough to protect the city from a mighty army? Sanballat is saying that it takes more than prayer and worship to rebuild the city. He goes, will they finish it in a day? I wonder how long it's going to take them. That suggests the workers had no idea how difficult the task was and would soon stop what they were doing. Everything that Nehemiah convinced them they could do, the Sanballat and his hecklers took them out. Can they bring these stones back to life? Indicates that their building materials were so old and damaged that they couldn't possibly use to make a strong wall. They were doing just fine till then. But this guy, this heckler, he's like, look at this junk you got to work with. This stuff is just nasty. You know what we call that today? Trash talking. And the workers became the punchline of every joke to follow, and everyone got a laugh at their expense. If this was today, it'd be David Letterman's top 10 list of why the workers won't finish the wall. So Sanballat has his buddy Tobias step in. He's like the 1-2 punch, this other guy. He hoped his sarcasm would make the builders cast an apprehensive glance at their hard work and activate them within an avalanche of discouragement. Friends, whenever you attempt to get involved in the work of God, you can expect ridicule. Expect it, but don't stop working. And that's what the Jews did. Pressures from without often create problems from within. Opposition outside the ranks can lead to depression on the inside. The people, the Jews, listened to the voice of the enemy that was the most persuasive, not the voice of God. That's where the mistake was made. And just like today, it's so easy to internalize the words of the enemy and feel like giving up. Things have not changed at all in that regard. Notice the first part of verse 10. This is Nehemiah 4. It says, discouragement started first within the royal tribe of Judah. That's who they got to first, the tribe of Judah. These people had David's blood in their veins, and you would think they would have had more faith and courage than the rest. But they were looked upon leaders and pace setters by the rest of the people there. So find out who the kingpin is and go for them first. Because if they fall, they'll take the rest. And it was working. If the tribe of Judah was bummed out, then the other tribes would be more inclined to give up the project as well. The strength of the laborers is giving out. Simply put, the workers were tired. They were hitting it hard and they needed some rest. The phrase giving out carries with it the idea that they were so tired they were staggering and tottering and stumbling. When you are physically drained, it is very easy to become discouraged at the slightest problem. And it's also interesting to notice that when the workers become tired and discouraged, and they were only half done. When they started picking on them the most, they were halfway up. At that point, it looked like they might have succeeded. So that's when the enemy stepped in to hit even harder, when it looked like they were going to be successful. You know, the newness of the project had worn off, and the work has started to become routine and boring and hard. Verse 10 says, we cannot rebuild the wall. Bam! It's exactly what the enemies wanted. All at once they stepped back and said, we just can't do it. We quit. You know, these are the very same people that back in verse 6 said they were so excited and working with all their heart. Their wheels fell off. If something could go wrong, it did go wrong. Mr. Murphy was right even in the Old Testament, even though he hadn't been born yet. The people started complaining about all the rubble in verse 10. Now, wait a minute. They say we're surrounded with junk. It's trashed. Now, wait a minute. It didn't just magically appear. It was there. It was there and they were making the best of it. Now, all of a sudden, we can't do this anymore. Instead of God gazers, they were rebel gazers. Just as they lost sight of their goal, so too can we lose sight of our goal when we have too much garbage in our lives. And another cause of discouragement is fear. So the enemies did a 1, 2, 3 punch. Now they're going to make them afraid. And what did they say to them? They said, you know, you're going to be attacked. Yeah. Enemy's going to come with troops and swords and knives. And before you can get this thing up the rest of the way, they are going to attack you and kill you. And that made it a done deal. So back to Nehemiah. He appeared to be the only guy that was praying through all of this. He prayed when he was in front of the king. Please, things aren't going good in Jerusalem. Can I have a leave of absence? And he kept praying to God that this would succeed. And he seemed to be the only guy that, was getting this part. So what did he do? He prayed some more, and then he rallied the troops again. He says, guys, you can't quit. You can't quit. Now, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Now, we're going to have some guards. The lowest part of the wall, because, people weren't building exactly, the same height all at the same time. They had their own sections. Where there's the lowest part of the wall, we'll put guards. Now, we're going to arm the workers. We're going to give you guys swords, shields, whatever you need. And you're going to work it under the buddy system. So, we're going to have 2 of you with the wheelbarrow, and you're going to have your sword in your hand to protect. And we're going to have an alarm system, which was what? Bugle blowers, They didn't have, alarms like we have today. They had the bugle. Now, if you guys hear the bugle, you all go right into this section because it's the safest. And you know what? It worked. It worked. Nehemiah says, don't be discouraged. Don't listen to those guys, okay? Yeah, it's possible we might get attacked by somebody because our walls aren't built up. But Nehemiah got it figured out. And they completed the task. Who came and attacked them? What enemy came? The ones that they were so fearful of? No, he's a wimp. He's all mouth. Yeah. Sand bullet, silver bullet, whatever his name was. No, he's just a wimp. He's mouth. They didn't attack. You know who attacked? Nobody. Nobody came. For all their fear, nothing bad ever happened. But they expected it to. They expected it to. Somebody said that 60% of our fears are totally unfounded. I don't know where these statistics came from, maybe Wikipedia. And it said 20% are already behind us. 10% are so petty they don't make any difference. 5% are real, but we can't do anything about them. And 5% are real, and we can do something about them. I don't know where these numbers came from, but the point is, most of what we fear never happens. For all the discouragement that we internally hold and for some reason can't get rid of, it never happens. And yes, sometimes it does. Sometimes things do happen. But it's a very small percentage of the time. And sometimes it's because we brought it on ourselves. I saw a post on Facebook and it says, yes, everything does happen for a reason. And sometimes that reason is just because you're stupid and make bad choices. Cures for discouragement. Nehemiah found cures for discouragement. He had awesome people skills. The first cure, if you find yourself always expecting the worst, is to ask God's help. Remember I said Nehemiah never stopped asking for God's help? He prayed what we called a popcorn prayer in front of the king as he brought him his wine that night. Do you know what that is? A popcorn prayer? That's a short one. Bam! Lord, help me through this. Amen. That's a popcorn prayer. But then it also records 2 more prayers of length. Now, did God hear the lengthy prayers any more than he heard the popcorn prayer? Do you have to get in an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours to get God's attention? I don't think so. I think his popcorn prayer was just as heartfelt as the others. But the point is, he asked God's help. Hear us, O God, for we are despised. This is one of his prayers to God. Turn their insults back on their own heads. Give them over as plunder in a land of captivity. Do not cover up their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of our builders. Now this was quite a prayer. And you know what? It wasn't a nice prayer either, was it? He wasn't praying for them to be converted. He just wanted God to take care of them. But it was an understandable and it was an honest prayer. You got to give him that. He knew the enemies were really fighting against God, so he said, God, you deal with them. You know, he didn't give lectures to the workers, the guys on the wall. He didn't say, okay, let's get them back, guys. If they start yelling at us, we'll just yell back. Here's the principle we can learn from Nehemiah. When people talk against you, don't talk back. Talk to God. Verse 9 tells us that they prayed to God and they posted a guard. When their enemies started talking, Nehemiah continued to pray and the people continued to work. Second cure, reorganize your priorities. Sometimes we just have to fall back 10 yards and punt. In verse 13, Nehemiah said, therefore I stationed some of the people behind the lowest point of the wall, like we talked about, at the exposed places, posting them by families with their swords and spears and bows. Nehemiah had to fall back 10 yards and punt to get this plan completed. When we're discouraged, one of the things we can do is reorganize our priorities. You can look at your life, you can adopt a change in approach instead of becoming so discouraged that you quit. Do you have a problem in your marriage? If so, don't bail on your spouse. Get help. Do you have a problem with your job? Don't give up. Change your priorities and maybe your attitude. Do you have a problem in your walk with God? Don't stop following him. Reorganize your schedule so you can meet with him on a regular basis. Find a small group. Find a Bible study. Don't be overcome by discouragement. Do something about it. And I'm not just talking about the people sitting here in front of me. I'm talking to our Facebook church as well. Number 3, if you want to defeat discouragement, the third thing you can do is to remember who God is. After looking everything over and sensing the discouragement within his team, Nehemiah rallied his troops. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, who is great and awesome. They needed to remember God and what he had promised. Now back to my stories. Do I really believe that appliances talk to each other? Do I really believe that there is a conspiracy among the appliance manufacturers and the auto people? That they somehow communicate to each other to die at the same time? No, I don't really. It might seem that way, and I've heard other people saying that, but really, sometimes things just happen. And I told you the story about our lost beach vacation. And we were disappointed at first. We were discouraged, but you know, you start thinking about all the places that we have been. Jerry and I have been blessed to travel so much. And it's kind of like, you know, I'm the spoiled little princess that wanted to go to the beach and I didn't get to go. We just got off a 7-day cruise 2 months earlier. Shame on me. Yes, we were discouraged, but now we think it's funny. I mean, it's another story. When you travel, people that travel have stories, and that's another story that we can tell. So should I believe in Murphy's Law? That anything will go wrong? That can, or however you want to phrase it. Should I believe that? Should you believe that? So, when you're down, turn your attention from your discouragement to the one who is able to do something about it. I should say, Lord, I have so many nice appliances. I have a nice house. I have made so many trips. I should say thank you for all that you have given me. All that you have given me. And not point out the little speck of something that goes wrong. Remember His power. Remember His goodness. Remember His greatness. Our God is great and awesome. Remember Him. Friends, God's great net of security spans this globe. His security was hugging around the Jewish people in our story today. But no matter where we live, no matter what we've done, no matter how discouraged we've been, He stretched out His everlasting arms beneath us, around us, and over top of us. As a result, we should learn to live and work freely and without fear, knowing that we are protected and safe and secure. Discouragement can be defeated as we request His help, we organize our priorities, and remember, most of all, who He is. Amen.